my fine young friends. I'm Cheryll Simmerman. I probably know most or all of you, and you might know me from singing at church in the choir. I'm going to read to you a wonderful inspirational story today about a famous singer named Marian Anderson who lived quite a few years ago. But before I begin to read the story, let's recite together our affirmation. The spirit within me is the one spirit that lives in all of us. I love that. It makes me think of a quote that I often refer to, we are all flowers of one garden. So as I read this story, we might be thinking about a few questions like, what would it feel like to sing in front of large numbers of people? Would you love it? And what types of songs do you like to sing? Marian sang all sorts of songs, spirituals, opera, folk music. She sang just about everything. So let's hear a little bit about the story of Marian Anderson. Marian loved to sing. At 6 years old, Marian was in the children's choir of her church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Even then, her voice was strong and clear as she sang the songs she loved with devotion and joy. Her friends were not surprised when, at 8 years old, Marian won the prize at the church recital, 50 cents. Even with all her natural talent, Marian knew that she needed to study and work hard to be a professional singer. But when she was out of high school and old enough to seriously study music, there wasn't enough money to pay for a teacher. Marian was deeply grateful when her friends, who had listened to her sing in the choir, raised the money to pay for a well-known voice instructor. Marian never forgot that it was their kindness and generosity that made everything that came later possible. It was very unusual for someone to have the ability to sing both high notes, like many women soprano singers, and low notes, like many men singers. Marian was one of those unusual people, and she trained hard to build strength and control. Her teacher was so confident in her abilities that he entered her in a singing contest, and this time the prize was more than 50 cents. The winner would sing with the famous New York Philharmonic Orchestra in a huge outdoor amphitheater for thousands of people who paid for tickets to hear her sing. Her teacher was right to feel confident because 300 singers entered the contest and Marian won. She gave an amazing performance with the New York Philharmonic, and anyone would think that she would have had hundreds of invitations to sing after that. But the year was 1925, and Marian was a black woman in a country where black people were not treated the same as white people. The restrictive laws against African Americans and the attitudes held by many people of that time made it very difficult for Marian, so when she had a chance to go to Europe, she did. In Europe, Marian studied and continued to train her voice, and she sang a lot. Marian became famous across the continent of Europe. She gave performances for the King of Sweden and the King of Denmark. She sang in Paris and London and toured Italy, Austria, Spain, Poland, Latvia, and Russia. She was praised by royalty, conductors, and music lovers everywhere she went. The color of her skin was not a concern. People just wanted to hear her sing. By the time she returned to the United States, she was known as one of the greatest singers in the world. Back in America, Marian was invited to the White House by President Franklin Roosevelt and his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor is another role model for many of us. Marian was the first African American to be invited to the White House and the first to sing for the president. It seemed an even higher honor than singing for a king, and Marian said it was the only time she ever experienced stage fright. But despite her nervousness, she must have done well, because they asked her to come again when the King and Queen of England were visiting. Marian was happy to be home in the United States, and she gave concerts throughout the country. She was deeply aware of the suffering caused by the idea that people with dark skin did not deserve the same treatment as those with light skin. She did what she could to change that belief. In the South, where barriers were particularly strong, she insisted on having seating available up front for Black audience members. Usually, the Black ticket holders had only the poorest seats in the back section, although they paid the same ticket price as those up front. It was a small victory, but it was something she could do. Then something happened that drew a lot of attention to Marian and the unfairness of racial discrimination. Marian and the people who helped arrange her concerts requested permission to use a large concert hall in Washington, D.C. The organization that owned the hall refused. No other reason was given except the color of her skin. Many people were shocked and took notice. When the president and first lady found out, they took action and gave permission for the concert to be held elsewhere on the morning of April 9th, 1939. It was Easter morning, and the place they chose was the Lincoln Memorial, a beautiful and grand monument in the most public part of Washington, D.C. Outside, on the steps in front of the memorial's large statue of Abraham Lincoln, Marian Anderson gave a free concert. Over 75,000 people stood or sat outside to hear the music. The concert was also broadcast on the radio, and millions more were able to listen at home. It was a cold morning, and Marian had to wear a heavy coat over her lovely gown. But no one minded the chill, as the warm voice of Marian Anderson filled the air and filled the hearts of all who came. Many lives were touched by Marian Anderson's voice, and many were inspired by her example of beauty, kindness, and strength in the face of racial inequality. She continued to sing for all who would listen, and her voice helped people feel the one spirit that exists everywhere. Again, we are all flowers of one garden. So you might maybe even find online on YouTube, you might find a recording or two of Marian Anderson. It's out there. Just maybe ask your parents to find a recording of Marian Anderson singing. She is truly an inspiration. And I really admire Eleanor Roosevelt for it. Eleanor Roosevelt was the one who really pushed to have her welcome to sing in Washington, D.C. So let's end this story with our affirmation again. The spirit within me is the one spirit that lives within all of us.